the TIF service payments first go to debt service, second go to the school district up to the point where the school district is made whole on a net basis. And that's what Russ was describing, where normally school districts, if they get increased taxes, they might get increased taxes of 100, but the state will take away 70. So their net's 30. That's what we're trying to make up. And so they'll get their net amount. Then we're proposing that to the extent the school district, to the extent the city had to dip into its pocket to do make-up payments in any year where there wasn't enough to make the school district whole, then the city would get reimbursed. Then after that, more money could go to the school district, or more money could go, for example, to debt service. Those are some details we can work through with the city and the school district.
The follow-up question I have there, again, not an expert on taxes, but if the property value increases, would the schools also be entitled to additional monies if the value of the property went up?
Yes, exactly. Because the objective is to put them in the same position as if the property were constructed and not subject to TIF. So that I just said, assume that they get 100 in taxes and they got 70 taken away, then the delta would be 30 that we'd be making up. If we instead assume they got 150 in taxes and 110 were taken away, then we have to make up 40. So that makeup, the overall payment to the school district could increase if values increase.
Okay, and that was the follow-up. I wanted to make sure I made Councilman Yates' question, because I think the original indication was that the value of the building went up, then the city's obligation to the school system might go down, but actually it could go up, is what I'm hearing you describe.
It could, but again, to the extent there's more TIF service payments that are needed to make the school district whole. On the back end, a higher value is good, because if it generates excess, then it can get the city paid back for previous payments. So there could be portions, and it's hard to describe in the abstract. We could show you the numbers, and obviously we look forward to doing that.
The school systems benefit from a higher value wouldn't necessarily be as big as the increase in the service payment is?
Absolutely correct. Again, because the objective is to put the school district in the same position as if the property were fully taxable, accounting for the state school funding formula. And with respect to the state school funding formula, we're making reasonable assumptions. We've met with the school district. We're making reasonable assumptions about what that will be, because we can't predict what the school funding formula is going to be 20 years from now or 15 years from now. We know from the past it's generally functioned the same way, and so as values increase, their portion will increase.
Well, does that happen automatically, Scott? Or my understanding is that there's an agreed amount that gets paid over time, and that amount doesn't necessarily change. And then there's sort of a waterfall of how things get paid out later. But it's also my understanding that whatever that number is, it can be negotiated between the school district and the city.
That's as Ms. Williams points out, the general principle that we put them in the exact same position. If values would increase, the amount needed to make the school district whole will increase, but there can be different details cut whenever we structure the ultimate TIF agreement and the compensation agreement with the school district. So there could be what the school district could agree to. For example, the city could agree to is that the school district is going to get X, and after the school district gets X, then the city gets an amount. The details we worked out. We put something on the table to begin the discussion.
Okay. The other question I have, you just said something that caused me concern, because we're talking about a 25-year agreement, but yet if the school funding formula changes during that period, would that change the potential obligation of the city, or would that change the obligation of Port, ATSG?
Yes, good question. Because of the need to pay the debt service in the 166 loan, we need to have an agreement that it's based upon a reasonable assumption that stays in place about what the school funding formula is going to be. So in other words, we can't have it adjust for changes in the school funding formula. We can't have it adjust. Russ showed the numbers where we need 226,000, whatever it is, to pay debt service. If we have an adjustable TIF agreement where all of a sudden the school district gets $100,000 and they're not going to pay debt service, it can't be structured that way. But we need to make reasonable assumptions so there's enough for the debt service in the 166 loan, and so both the school district and city can have reasonable certainty about what they're going to get, and in terms of cash. Whether the school district might in certain years get more, it's possible that in some years the school district will get more than it would on a net basis. It's possible in some years the school district will get less. But with debt service, we have to come to an agreement on the reasonable assumption and stick with it, so that everyone can plan their affairs accordingly.
So does that trump, and this goes back to my question of obligation on the city's part. I understand what you're saying, the deal has to be structured in a way so that everybody knows the amounts based on today's world. But if a change came up to where the schools would be entitled to a great big more, would that obligate the city to make that amount whole is my concern. Would it change our obligation, or does the agreement stay the same regardless of the funding system?
The agreement will stay the same regardless of the funding system. We'll make it clear, and our proposals make it clear in the agreement that the formula is X, so the formula is not, that we put in the agreement, is not going to account for potential future changes in the school funding formula. So the city's obligation will be within reasonable parameters based on the value. The value could go up or down, and that could change what the school district gets, and it could change what the city has to pay. And we could show you how it would break out at different numbers. But within reasonable parameters, we're going to know what those payments are going to be, and a change in the school funding formula will not change that. So, and again, I want to emphasize one thing that Russ said. The city will not have any risk as a part of this amenable to school district. There's a possibility that everyone won't get as much as they project. There's a possibility they'll get more than they project. But there will not be a risk. The city's obligation will be to pledge TIF service payments that it receives. If it does not receive the TIF service payments, it's not going to have to come out of any other fund. Similarly, with respect to the school district, the city's obligation is going to be to pay up to the new income tax revenues from this project to the school district, to make the school district whole under the formula we agreed to. And again, the city, as we work through this, you'll see there will be a band of expectations. And the city's not going to get zero out of this. Can we guarantee it's going to be 126,000 or plus or minus 1% every year? Absolutely not. It's going to be a little bit variable. And likewise, the school district is going to get at least the company is going to agree to a minimum value so that the school district will get what's enough after there's enough to make debt service payments in the 166 loan. And can we guarantee that's going to be enough every single year to keep them whole on that basis? No, because we don't know what the school funding formula will be. But in some years, it may make them more than whole on that basis. In other words, in some years, this happens in some TIFs. In some years, the school district may get more in TIF service payments than it would receive if it got taxes, and then revenues were taken away from the state. And that's, I think someone mentioned that the TIF values don't impact the school district. The school district school funding fund, that's correct. So school districts would generally prefer to receive TIF service payments rather than tax payments, because again, they don't impact what they get from the state.
Working with that, if the school funding by a miracle is fixed by the state, and the schools are finally made whole like they're supposed to, then they're really benefiting at that point, because they're gonna still receive these payments. Because it's a set, this is going to happen. So at that particular point, the schools are double winners. Now, on the other side of things, if the state decides to gut the school systems and really cut their payments, we're not sitting here having to all of a sudden fund the entire school system because of this, TIF agreement and the drop, because we're going to have a set formula that's going to be in place no matter what the state does to the school funding system.
And the maximum the city would have to contribute in a make-up payment would be limited to the amount of incremental income taxes collected by the city related to this project. And as Scott has mentioned numerous times, there is an agreement that will have to be struck between the city and the schools, and maybe the state, various parties, as to how this works. And as you know, in negotiations, there are lots of things that give and take. So there will be an agreed upon formula, but each side will get to, I would assume, will weigh in and figure out how to best manage, mitigate the risk. So there are things to talk about, clarify that.
Sure. And it's, I'll note that, going to Councilman's questions, the fundamental.
He's on that name.
Sorry.
That's all right, don't worry about it, nobody can say it.
You can say it any way you want.
Fundamentally, the state school funding formula, as it pertains to property taxes and how local property taxes work, it hasn't changed. I've been practicing 15 years. It hasn't changed in those 15 years. That was before DeRolf, after DeRolf, Voinovich, Taft, Strickland. Right now, we're in this interim period where the so-called bridge formula is being used. There really isn't a school funding formula. We're in this 2-year period where the Kasich administration figures out how it wants to approach this. But through the years, what they've changed is how they determine the amount necessary to adequately educate children. That's what the state's changed over the years. They changed how you figure out what each school district needs. But in general, what the state has done is it said, look, you need $6,000 per student or whatever it is to adequately educate children. And so we're going to make sure you have 6,000. The way we're going to do that is we're going to assume you can make from local property taxes 2% or 2.3% times your taxable value, and then we're going to give you the difference. I mean, fundamentally, that formula has been in place for a really long time because it makes a lot of sense. It really is a shared state and local responsibility, and I highly doubt that's going to change. Details are going to change, but ultimately, I don't think anyone has a solution to make any school funding anything other than a shared state and local responsibility.
Just like to clarify something the Russ said, because you said the maximum liability of the city could be.
I heard that too.
Up to is all of the incremental income tax created by these jobs. Is that correct?
That's the proposal. That, we're not making take it or leave it proposals. But what we put on the plate was that proposal, and under the most reasonable assumptions, as Russ went through, that's only, we're projecting that the makeup payment would only be $14,000 or something really small in those early years. But the way we put it out there was up to the whole amount.
51 minus 37.
Which could end up being no net gain.
Correct.
But like I said, it's an agreement between the multiple parties. So there's some of these details to work out between the school, city.
do have one other question. And it is similar to Councilman McKay. When you look at 100% abatement, does that similarly abate all taxes for MRDD, senior services, health levies? So libraries, we're looking at all of the tax monies that would impact the community being involved in this.
Correct.
Okay, I've been studying 5709, 40, 41, 42, 43, not an attorney, so it was kind of murky for me to understand. There are probably more questions I'll have later, but obviously we're going to have meetings associated with some of the details in this, and I thank you for the answers I got.
A question, if you have a minute, two parts. One is, realistically, how long do you figure it will take to get the building and the number of employees up to maximum? And however long that is, if a loan payment comes due during that time, how is that handled?
We have 3 years, as required by the state's, proposed by the state's financing package to reach the 259 employment level. That is a defined term in our term sheet. It's a job commitment that we're obligated to make. We have 3 years to do it.
From the completion of the building to the start of the project.
So from the completion. Right, we have to be able to get up and
I'm
running.
just asking.
Yeah.
And how long until the building, how long is your estimate until the building and the manpower is there?
You know, this is my estimate. Our discussions have been that roughly it would take 12 to 14 months to complete the building. Which we are, you know, as I mentioned, time is of the essence for a number of reasons. One of those is we would like to avoid as much as possible some of the construction work happening during the winter months. That will drive up some of the costs. If we have a winter like last year, maybe not. But if we have a nasty winter, then that will have an adverse impact on construction. I'd say
The second part of Bob's question, I believe, was what happens if TIF payment comes due prior to, you say we have a horrible winter or something happens. I think the second part of his question was what happens if a TIF payment comes up prior to any funds being generated?
The company will have to make it. I mean, the company is guaranteeing to make the minimum amount of TIF payment in order to amortize the debt.
Anybody else have any questions? Lauren?
The 257 jobs, that net new jobs? Otherwise, we're not losing some at one end.
No, sir.
It's not net, it's not net new jobs.
The state agreement actually requires us to keep the 380 to 400,000 jobs that are out there right now. 380 to 400 jobs that are out there right now, in addition to the 259 jobs.
They require you to do that?
That's a requirement of the funding.
And if I may interject, the port has stipulated a number of full-time jobs that have to be maintained, existing full-time jobs.
If I could follow up on Councilman Mee's question. During that period where you haven't gotten up to full speed and the payments, obviously the income tax isn't occurring here, the city would then be obligated to use whatever income tax it got from any jobs that existed. But you're indicating we would not be obligated for anything beyond the incremental income tax associated, or would we be required to make whole payments to the school system even though the income tax wasn't flowing yet?
No, you would only be obligated to make them to the extent you have incremental taxes. So that, again, there would be no risk to the city in terms of its existing tax base.
And we'll have to look at, I believe the amortization on that 166 is scheduled as such that we have the values in place. The property's in place, that means the jobs ought to be there. And so there should be sufficient money available to service the debt. I mean, again, there's a delay in the amortization, it's a year.
And I guess it also goes to the development of the new business as well. I would guess you're only gonna bring so many people on when you have contracts that you
Right.
can execute on.
That's why they give us 3 years.
You said 270,000 a year estimated service payment?
No, 227,000 is
That's the payment.
that's the loan payment.
274,000, I believe.
Okay, the schools get, the two school systems get 55% of that normally. And that doesn't come up with, what do you come up with that figure that the schools need? We get out of that. It should be 55% because that's the take that you get out of the property tax.
Right, but then they lose state funding based off of that 55%.
That's all out of our real property taxes. 55%, 2.7 for the Oaks and about 52 for the school system. So I would come up with, what's half of that? It was less, it was more than what you stated, I think, that the schools needed would get. What would the school?
51,000.
It's about 150,000 they would normally get from normal distribution of property tax from that size of a tax base.
I don't know if that's correct.
Well, and the city will lose, they'll gain the income tax, but they're gonna lose 16% of the property taxes from that.
Here's the, you're saying the city's gonna lose, somebody's gonna lose.
Well,
Nobody's gonna lose
there's a
anything
net.
with this.
When you get the income tax, you have to subtract what you lose in property taxes. That's a big plus, granted, for the city. I'm not knocking
Yeah.
that.
So we try to steer away from the notion that somebody's gonna lose, in this.
Well, that's your position, and you have to, right?
Well, you can't lose something you don't have.
If you don't do it, that's right. As,
Yeah, that's,
as we like to
that big old
say,
yellow building out there.
you could get 100% of zero or a certain percentage of something is the simplest way to look at it.
Okay, back to the basic question. What's 55% of 270-some thousand? That's what the schools would need to be held harmless,
Well,
kept whole.
the schools have calculated the number that they're comfortable with.
It's a
And
little-
they've gone through and figured out, with the state treasurer's involvement, and the city and the school need to negotiate what that number is. But it's lower than the number that you're giving me. I did not calculate it myself. I took the number from the school.
Well, I have over the years, and the school's take is 52% for the city schools and about 3% for Great Oaks.
Okay.
Those two together, 55%, they normally get in tax distribution. The treasurer sends them a check to that amount every year. And that's what he'll have to do here. The city will direct the treasurer to keep them whole, right?
Mr. Hunter, at the end of the day, the school and the city will have to come to an agreement on what that is, that makes them comfortable.
I just want to bring that
Yes,
point
sir.
out.
We appreciate that. The school, what they decide they need is what they decide they need.
Oh, what they decide, yeah, if they want to take less than they would have normally gotten, that's fine.
I can actually
Mr.
answer
Dunn?
that. The 55% is correct, but their hold harmless number that they're using is the 25% that we have
Oh.
to be able to negotiate against.
But that limits the 10-year term, to use 25%.
Correct.
Yeah. Sticky.
Well, I'll tell you what sticky is, having to continually lay off people and see our school system just get driven into the ground.
Amen, sister.
It's been that way ever since I got back on the board, ever since 2007. All we do is cut jobs and eliminate people. I'm tired of it. It's gotta come to an end.
So hopefully you'll be held harmless.
That's all we're asking.
But I don't see with the numbers, somebody needs to check, I'm not saying I'm there.
Well,
Empirical
the
business.
other thing to take into consideration with, with the schools is they do have an income tax also, and they will benefit from these jobs moving into the district.
The more jobs that come in, the better.
So
because
as
right
long
now-
as we can make it hold harmless on the property tax end of things, they will gain on the income tax.
That's hard to quantify, we don't know that. But you have to use the figures he gave, which is
Mr. Hunt,
not 55%.
I hope we made this very clear. This is not something the company is forcing. We can't do that Because there's too many interested parties involved to make this transaction successful. It's going to have to be the meeting of the minds as to what everyone can live with. We have laid out the general guidelines of how this would work.
Consensus.
Paul?
Can I just try to summarize from my side, from the treasurer and the tax side to it? My understanding then is the school's gonna come up with a number that they're happy with, and we're gonna hold them harmless for that number. That's correct, right?
Yes.
The county is gonna be to the plus side of it for sales tax, for whatever you guys charge for your work and your business, so there's gonna be sales tax revenue to the county. The air park, my understanding is the lease will be to them so that they can service the actual debt because they own the land and they own the building. Is it a triple net then that you're gonna make them, you're gonna pay the utilities and you're gonna...
Right, as we do today.
You're gonna take care of improvements, stuff like that, so they're gonna be okay to it. And what is the dollar buyout after the 25th year?
We have no option to.
Never goes to
own
using.
the property at the airbase.
Now, you did mention, we get to keep all of the income tax during the construction time for the construction workers that are out there. So we're to the plus for the city for the income tax during the construction period of 14 months. You mentioned at one time there's a penalty if we don't maintain the 259 jobs, and that penalty though is to the state, right? That doesn't give anything back to us in the city. That's just a state hold harmless because of the agreement that you have for the 259.
It might be a higher interest rate. There could be an acceleration clause on the financing. I mean, those things have to be worked out with the state, but we do know this, if we don't meet our job commitment requirement, there's gonna be some pain that will come.
The bottom line to the city is if we don't project, if we don't use the 140 or whatever number it is minus the 14 or whatever we have to pay to them, we never dip into our own pockets to make the city school districts whole if we haven't gotten that already back. But we could end up getting zero if the number of jobs aren't there because all of our money that we get may have to go to hold the city schools harmless. Right, so that, if we could be a zero, but we'll never be a negative. So everybody's to the good somewhere, as long as we never take it out of our pockets.
And if I may, at the estimated make-whole payment total to both school districts at a $14.5 million value is $51,300.
Right.
So even if theoretically there were no excess TIF service payments, then obviously $51,300 is a small portion of $140,000. And obviously, $140,000 could be $150,000, it could be $130,000, it could be.
But that's under 10-year 25, the 51,000, right?
No, the
That's what you're saying.
51,000 is what we're talking about with the school district, and that's about what the number.
But isn't that-
we hope it would be.
That's the number they've come up with acceptable for their forbearance of real estate tax.
You want to discuss the status of where we are with the school district?
Well, that number is for the Wilmington City Schools and the Joint Vocational School at $51,000.
Mhm.
Is what we estimate to be the make whole amount to get the schools back in a position, net revenue position, as if the building.
But then
There's
they're
no
10-year
TIF.
limited. If you do that, your TIF is 10-year limited as far as the schools go.
But that's why we have to work with the schools and the city council, because in order to go beyond the 10 years, is that right, 10 years? Before you go beyond the 10 years, you have to get agreement.
Right, you can steamroll the school 1025, right? I mean, not steamroll, but.
We wouldn't need approval.
You would need approval, but your 51,000 is based on that approval, not on.
That's
we're
right.
gonna- Pardon me?
This is just the calculations that if we all came into agreement, this is what we think
An example.
our estimates are. We openly share this information with the schools, the city council, the numbers, and if there's disagreement, let's
Okay,
talk
let's assume
about
the
it. So that's what we're-
51,000 keeps the schools whole,
Yeah.
but the 10 years elapses. Then what do you do for the other 15 years?
Well, this is a 25-year TIF. That number is on an annual basis. I may not be understanding
There
your
are a
question.
couple of things I think that are getting missed. First of all, it's between the school district and the city to negotiate the amount. The school district needs to feel comfortable with it, the city needs to feel comfortable with that payment. It has nothing to do with the company. other than the fact that we're gonna share, here's how
Oh,
much.
I understand that.
Here's how much tax, well, how much TIF service payment in lieu of tax we're going to pay. If the tax rate goes up, if the property valuation goes up, there will be more money. It is between the school district and the city to also decide what will happen to that more money. They could pay off the TIF sooner, they could send more money to the school district, they could keep more money. That's between the school district and the city.
But again, the
and I think it's-
51,000 is 25% of the.
Well, but that's
estimated
between
tax.
them to negotiate. We're not really discussing the number here. We're just trying to get to a point where this is the proposal, this is how it works, and now people need to go back to their respective boards and figure out how to make this work between them. They need to come up with something between them that allows this community to have 259 new jobs that will spread throughout the community, generate more income, hopefully build the schools, the city, and everything else here.
Okay,
We
so
have
if
to
the
start
schools-
somewhere.
Excuse me. Go ahead. If the schools agree to 25% over, I don't think you can agree then to over 10 years. But your estimate is assuming the 25%, right? That's what the 51 is based on, this 25% of what the schools, the school will be held harmless at 25% of what they would have gotten.
He needs to go to a school board meeting, I guess, to discuss that issue. I mean, that's not a,
That'll be a conversation.
yeah, that's not a conversation that we need to have here, because
Right.
his numbers.
Well, they're putting out the information, then
Yeah,
we
we
have
have
to
to
see what it's
go to the
based
school
on.
district and see what they're proposing, not,
Yeah, we're making an estimate of how it could work. It's just an
Could.
example.
I think that's what Mr. Smithwick did, was to be able to get the discussion going. He gave you an illustration of how a TIF is structured. The actual details will be done in the negotiation between the city and the school. Page 6 is just an illustration of how things would work. Numbers are not concrete.
Exactly.
Anybody else on council have any questions? Anyone else?
Brianna, I have a quick question. Scott, maybe you can answer this for me. It's regarding the estimated additional city income taxes. So do you envision that there would be some kind of compensation agreement between the schools and the city, correct?
Correct.
Will you let the city know what would happen if we could not reach an agreement with the schools and the city?
Oh, sure. Thank you. The statutorily, if there's no agreement reached between the city and the school district with respect to any type of property tax abatement, TIF, where the school district's not held harmless on a gross basis, which is what we're talking about here, the city is required to share up to half of, it's basically 50% of the new income tax revenues with the school district. There's typically an offset for some infrastructure, but again, assume 50% of the new income tax revenues. So it's, again, we're trying to set forth a structure for a win-win deal where everyone has positive benefits from it. Thanks for pointing that.
No problem.
Thanks. Anyone else? Well, thank you all very much. I certainly appreciate the input there. We've been, I know that the Port Authority and ATSG have been negotiating extensively to get the jump hangar built and bring those jobs to the community. We certainly appreciate that. This is our first glance at TIF in a public session. So obviously there were a lot of questions, and I so much appreciate you coming tonight and sharing that with us. Obviously there's a lot of assumptions being made, a lot of details to iron out, but at the end of the day, I don't know how history will paint me in another 3.5 years at the end of my term as a mayor, but I will not be characterized as the mayor that stood in the way of jobs. That's for sure. I can think of a lot of reasons why this might make me a little bit nervous, but I can think of 259 good reasons why we need to work together to bring this about. So I certainly appreciate your being with us tonight and your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, members of council, thank you.
Certainly. Thank you. Thanks, guys. I have a few other items under my agenda. One is let me do this one first. I received an email just today. This will cost you. Well, I tell you what, I got an email today from the city manager of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, challenging us on our claim for the home of Banana Split. And in fact, I'm sorry that Gary Huffenberger isn't here tonight, because The email is actually addressed to Mr. Huffenberg. Did you get a copy of this?
There was one on our Facebook page.
Okay, well, gloves come off now. They are challenging our contention that we are the home of the banana split. And they say that just because we have a festival does not mean that we are the home of the banana split. And Alexander Graziani, the city manager of Latrobe, states in his email, maybe talking to Mr. Huffenberg, maybe you and your mayor Randy Riley and festival chairman Kevin Johnson would like to come to Latrobe and sample some of our history and banana split at Valley Dairy. Or possibly I could ship over some Valley Dairy ice cream with a case of bananas. He obviously doesn't realize that there's a whole lot more to banana split than ice cream and bananas. You've got chocolate syrup, strawberry topping, pineapple topping, whipped cream, nuts, and of course,
The cherry on top.
the cherry on top. So this guy does not know, and I hope this goes on YouTube, because although Alexander Graziani sounds like a very nice gentleman, he obviously does not know how to make a banana split. So if he wants to learn, he is welcome to come to Wilmington, the home of the banana split, to learn how to make one. We don't think that we invented the banana split because we have the festival here. We have the festival here because Ernest Hazard invented the banana split. So I got that off my chest. Thank you all very much.